Welcome to the Finance Marketing Podcast, a show that empowers finance professionals to market their businesses in ways that feel good and actually achieve results. I'm your host, Hillary. I've been working with folks in financial services to develop marketing strategies that work and create results-oriented marketing content since 2020. And I've learned a lot about what works in finance marketing, what doesn't work, and where financial services pros get stuck. Join us each Friday as we explore real, effective ways to market your finance business and connect with folks who truly embody your ideal clients. My conversation this week is with Brian Thorp, founder and CEO of Wealthtender, which is the industry's first SEC-compliant online review platform for financial advisors and the #1 independent find an advisor directory visited by 500,000 consumers annually. Brian and his wife call Austin, Texas home. Now, I met Brian toward the end of last year on LinkedIn and was just so delighted to find out what a down-to-earth and fun person Brian is, which really comes through in this conversation that we had. Now, ever since the SEC changed its rules about testimonials and reviews for financial advisors, I have been doing my best to learn about and keep up with the compliance-friendly ways advisors can take advantage of this regulation change. And I have to say, in all of my research, I still found myself very confused and unclear about what advisors could and couldn't do. After having this conversation with Brian, I no longer feel unclear about any of it, which is why I am so excited to share this interview with you so that you too can find out more about how to implement reviews and testimonials into marketing your firm so that you're still following all the rules and regulations laid out by the SEC or your state if you're a state registered advisor. So without further ado, let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining me on the Finance Marketing Podcast this morning, Brian. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you very much, Hillary. It's terrific to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to start. If you could just kind of introduce yourself a little bit, tell our listeners about who you are and what it is that you do. I know a lot of them already know you, but probably not all of them. So give us your story.
Yeah, so I've been in the industry, financial services, for 25 plus years, and had a corporate career working for Invesco, so a global asset management company where I was for 22 years, and really great career, good people, good place to be. But I had that entrepreneurial bug and the idea for Wealthtender, and it was just a lot of fun to dive in 2019 and get everything up and running on this front. So I've always been a big believer that regulatory change creates opportunities for disruption. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that today, I'm sure, but the opportunity to launch Wealthtender, and also importantly, as we talk about testimonials, online reviews, the opportunity really to change the perception of advisors in the industry. We look at studies from the CFA that did a report a couple of years ago showing that advisors rank less trustworthy than car mechanics. And I think there's a massive opportunity for us to really pivot and evolve that perception to really what in fact we know to be true, which is that there are millions of people served by their advisors who are very, very happy. And so the opportunity for us to help share their voices, I think, is going to be something tremendous in the future.
I would love to, and this might be all conjecture, but that's okay. I would love to ask your thoughts on why that is. Why do people see advisors as less trustworthy than car mechanics? Because I think that's a stark comparison. I think a lot of people also say they don't trust car mechanics.
Right. So I think there's a couple of things. And in fact, there's some positive news within that same CFA report. Just to clarify, the survey that they did interviewed both people that work with advisors and those who don't. And
Mm.
people that work with advisors had much more positive things to say because I think they clearly have an experience and understanding of just how much value financial advisors offer. But when you look at people not working with an advisor, you especially then see the rankings below the auto mechanic, right? And so I think part of the challenge for many consumers, many Americans, is what they hear about financial advisors is what they see on TV. And fortunately, it's been a while since we've had like a Bernie Madoff style situation, but there's always scams. That's what makes the headlines. People are understandably skeptical. If you're going to entrust your life savings to somebody, you do want to be cautious before going into that. And I think that's where it's just that perception. And of course, because advisors historically haven't been able to invite their clients to write reviews, testimonials that could be shared easily online, there wasn't really an opportunity for people to learn all the great things they're doing. They just hear the negative stories in the news. So it's time for a change.
Right. Well, can we start? I'm so excited to talk about testimonials and reviews with you. Can you give us a broad overview of what has happened in the last few years to change what some advisors, maybe not all advisors, are now allowed to do with reviews and testimonials?
Yeah, so like I said at the outset, big believer regulatory change creates opportunities. And there was speculation in 2019 that the SEC was going to come off its prohibition of testimonials or advisors being able to ask their clients for testimonials. And so essentially what changed is in 2019, the SEC put out a preliminary rule for the industry to respond to. And essentially, they had already done a good job of outlining what they were proposing for what's now become known as the SEC marketing rule. And there's more to it than just testimonials. It does cover topics like hypothetical performance, really outside the scope of our conversation today. But on the topic of testimonials specifically, historically, the SEC had prohibited advisors and advisory firms from being able to ask clients for testimonials because there was really a lack of comfort in allowing firms to do so, especially at a time when financial advisors 60 plus years ago were much more about investment management and very specifically the concerns the SEC had about touting investments that might be problematic. And
Mm,
today, when we look at what most people, when they're writing an online review or providing a testimonial, it's not so much about investment performance, it's about the emotional side. It's how their advisor makes them feel. And so the world has changed, and to the SEC's credit, they recognize that. So when they put forth their proposed rule in 2019, they really said the reason we're doing this, it's not to make advisors better marketers. It's because they really wanted to provide an opportunity for advisors to ask for testimonials, put them out in public forums like their websites, like Wealthtender online, where consumers looking to hire an advisor can then make a more informed and educated hiring decision. So to the SEC's credit, they said, look, if we put our consumer hat on, we all, when we're looking to hire, whether it's a doctor, a lawyer, or even a plumber, trust-based professionals, whether they're coming into your house or they're dealing with your health or legal matters, you really want to ensure that they're going to do a good job. And, of course, you can look at their education and credentials, but no matter the industry or profession, we all look to those online reviews. So we all want to know how good of an experience they've provided to the clients they serve. And ultimately, the SEC recognized that, and to their credit, I think did a really good job with the rule that they put forth. And so, again, SEC, so advisors that are registered with the SEC have a green light to follow the guidance that the SEC has prescribed. And we, of course, have built Wealthtender to be fully compliant with all of the SEC requirements. So you can't just go out and say, hey, leave me Google reviews, and then go tell people, hey, go look at my Google reviews. We'll talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure. But we've designed the platform, and there are ways, whether an advisor wants to just put reviews on their website or use a platform like Wealthtender, that they have an opportunity to do so. Now,
mm.
of course, for state registered advisors, the question is, are they able to follow in the footsteps of SEC registered firms? And that's, of course, a little bit more of a state by state basis. We've seen several, probably almost half of the states that have now synchronized up to the SEC marketing rule, essentially saying, as long as you follow in the footsteps of SEC firms following the rules prescribed there, then you can get started with online reviews. But there are other states that are a little bit slower, some saying that they're needing to jump through legislative hoops in order to make the change to their rules that still prohibit testimonials, and others that we know are perhaps states that just don't like to play along. Even though this is in the best interest of consumers, I think they're losing sight of the bigger picture, that this is something that they should be following in the footsteps of the SEC. And we're going to keep chipping away with some other advocates in the industry to hopefully make progress on that front. But there are a couple of holdout states there that it might be a while before advisors in those states can participate.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is if you're SEC registered, you have the green light. If you're state registered, you need to look a little bit further into your actual states, what they say in terms of regulations.
Exactly correct. And, we've reached out to just about all of the state regulators, and we do maintain a database that we can certainly share with you, and a link where your clients or audience that are watching this today can go and see the latest status that we have. XY Planning Network has also done a really good job of outreach to various state regulators. So, again, we're starting to see more regulators coming around, and in the meantime, really just trying to play an advocacy role we've participated in conversations with local financial planning association, FPA chapters that are chirping with their regulators in certain states. So that in itself is kind of that grassroots campaign where collectively I think we can work together as an industry and within the profession to hopefully get some of those holdout states to move the needle here sooner rather than later.
Uh, do you know, are the majority of states moving towards aligning with SEC regulations at this point, and there's just a few holdouts left, or are states a little bit slower?
Yeah, I'd say it's about half the states that have synchronized to the SEC or have sufficient leniency that permit advisors to follow with the SEC's guidelines. However, there are some very big states that haven't yet made the leap. California is certainly the largest that's not there yet. Texas, I think we're very, very close. The state regulator in Texas, just in March of this year, put out a notification that they're looking to amend or update that section of their code. So, I've submitted, formal kind of requests encouraging them that they're on a proper path to do so. And, hopefully within the state of Texas, within the next couple of months, we'll see some movement there. Oklahoma is another one that I've heard is pending to make the update. Again, there are some holdout states. California, I just reached out to the other day, and they just kind of reaffirmed we really don't have any plans to do anything about this anytime soon. So, we're going to see if we can't rattle some cages there a little bit and be a little bit of a good cop, bad cop. We'll continue to let the advisors play the good cop role, and maybe we can be a bit of a bad cop to rattle those cages without as much concern that we're going to be getting ourselves into too much hot water.
I love that. You're fighting the good fight. So you have some great articles on the Wealthtender website about exactly how to go about asking for testimonials, and there are right ways to do it and there are wrong ways to do it. So I'm going to link to there's two in particular that are coming to mind, so I'll link to both those articles, and if
Sure.
you have more, please send them my way. But I'll link them to them in the show notes. But can we go over that a little bit? So we have an advisor who is allowed to ask for and use testimonials, but they of course want to do it with compliance top of mind. Can you go through kind of what they need, what procedures they need to follow in order to do that?
Sure. So there's a few steps to get started. And if an advisor works for their own advisory firm, the first step before even requesting an initial review is to ensure you have firm policies in place that really
Mm,
articulate the approach that you take to requesting reviews and ultimately how you'll promote them. So we do, as you mentioned, provide various resources. We have a template that's editable that advisors can use, almost Mad Lib style, where you can go in and personalize it for your firm. And again, the SEC, to their credit, it's very straightforward. It's an opportunity to just talk about the types of places where you would be collecting reviews. So, is it just going to be through your website? Are you using a platform like Wealthtender? Where are you then publishing your reviews? What types of clients or contacts are you requesting reviews from? So, you do have an opportunity to request reviews from both clients, which the SEC deems to be testimonials, and then also the opportunity to request reviews from non-clients. Those the SEC refers to as endorsements. And essentially, there's no real delineation or issues with either. It's simply really a disclosure oriented regime. So when you collect those reviews, you're going to indicate very clearly whether or not the person that wrote the review is a current client or if they're a non client. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But coming back to your question, the first thing in terms of getting started, you want to get those policies and procedures in place. Again, very straightforward using the tools and resources we can make available. And then from there, once you're ready to get started, the other thing that's important before reaching out to like an individual client or a particular favorite client, the SEC doesn't want advisors cherry picking their favorite clients. And so we do encourage advisors when they're reaching out for the very first time to send an email to all current clients, inviting them to write a review. And again, we have a template that's worked very well. We've seen over 1,500 reviews come in for advisors through Wealthtender, and typically these are 5-star reviews. We've seen a couple of 4-star reviews from the type of person that says, I only give a five-star review maybe to my granddaughter in a recital. These are still glowing reviews. But nonetheless, people love their advisors. And again, going back to what we talked about with the auto mechanic, right? These are all 5-star reviews. People love their advisors. So we're going to help
mhm.
get that word out more. But again, coming back to the getting started, putting that email out to all current clients, do it from your CRM. We'll help you with the template and the language. That way, you do have the record on your CRM. So if the SEC or an examiner came in, you can show, yes, in fact, we weren't cherry picking. This went out to all of our current clients. And then our experience, what we've seen is generally right out of the gate, within the first couple of hours, you could get a handful of reviews. And then the first day or two, maybe 10 to 15 or 20% of the people that you reached out to that are responding right away, and then a trickle over the next handful of days. And so it's really just been terrific, heartwarming to see what people are writing about their advisors, the experience.
Mm,
Again, they're not talking about investment performance, they're talking about how their advisor makes them feel, maybe a particular circumstance they helped them through, whether it was getting the education funding plan in place to put their kids through college, or as they're becoming empty nesters and transitioning into retirement away from a traditional source of income at an employer. And so that's really been terrific to see. So now those reviews are starting to come in, but they can't be immediately published on an advisor's website or on Wealthtender without disclosures being added first. And
mm,
so what occurs on Wealthtender, the review comes in, and before it's published, we send the details of the review over to the advisor where they can then go in and add the appropriate disclosures. And again, to the SEC's credit, they really expect these reviews these disclosures to be very short and succinct. So, if we think about like a pharmaceutical ad in a magazine, you think about a half page ad with a really small fine print, and nobody looks at it, right? So to the SEC's credit, they said, look, if we're going to do this, we want people to read these disclosures, which means they need to be short, sweet, they need to be the same font size as the review itself.
mm,
And specifically, they really just want people that are reading reviews to know three things off the bat. And they refer to these as clear and prominent disclosures. So, first is whether or not the individual that wrote the review is a current client of the firm or not. Perhaps they're an acquaintance, somebody that knows the advisor well, but they're just not a client of the firm. They could still potentially speak highly to the character of the advisor, but they just aren't a client. So, there's the first disclosure. The second is whether or not they've received any compensation to write the review. And specifically, the SEC deems compensation, it could be cash compensation, it could be gift card, really anything. It could be a fee reduction if you take them out to dinner the night before. Any circumstance like that constitutes compensation. And again, it doesn't need to be verbose or really lengthy. A simple disclosure indicating if there was some form of compensation, and indicating that. The third disclosure is whether or not there are any conflicts of interest. And generally, what we see with the reviews coming into Wealthtender, it's a current client, there are no conflicts of interest, no compensation. But if there is a conflict, again, that's not a big deal. It could be anything as simple as this is a family member, and the disclosure can therefore just be short and sweet. The individual that wrote this review is my mom, right? And hopefully that's a
mm.
5-star review. If not, an opportunity
Bigger
to work on
problems.
there. Correct, right? A more typical conflict might be if you have an accountant that you have a referral relationship with. Maybe you refer business to them and back and forth, and now they have a vested interest in saying positive things about you. So you would want to disclose this is an accountant that we partner with, and they have a vested interest in saying positive things. Here's some of the conflict language that you might want to include. And again,
Mm.
that's entirely up to you as an advisor if you choose, as part of your firm policies for testimonials, to limit your reviews to just current clients, or if you choose to expand them to include endorsements, as the SEC refers to, for non-clients. That's up to you if you choose to do so.
Now, I have a couple of just kind of nuanced follow-up questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So going back to this first disclosure, disclosing whether someone is a current client or not, does that mean that these disclosures need to be updated often in case someone ever becomes a former client? Does that need to be disclosed, or is it once it's there, it's okay, it's good to go?
Sure. So advisors always have the ability to go in and edit whether that review is on their website, or if circumstances
Mm,
change, to make updates to the review, details, the disclosures, and that type of thing. What you would generally see is if it's a current client at the time that the review is written, if there's a date associated with that published review, so it's a current client as of that particular date. But if there
mm.
are circumstances that it's important to say this person's no longer a client, you could certainly do that.
And then my other question, it has to do with this idea of cherry picking. So I really love, that we give everyone a chance to give us our feedback. Now, let's say we do get a really unhappy client that gives a 1-star review, does that mean that it has to still be used, or can you kind of pick and choose which reviews you want to include either on your website or through Wealthtender or whatever it might be?
Sure. So there's a couple of things here. Let me start by just saying, the SEC doesn't want advisors cherry picking to just display their best reviews. So
Mhm.
to start with a profile page like Wealthtender, where you're collecting all of your reviews, if you did get a 1-star review for some reason and it's legitimate, if it's spam, then it doesn't need to appear. You can just delete it, and we have tools to archive. So you can say, "Hey, this is spam," and just put it away. But otherwise, all reviews need to be displayed on that profile page. Now, let's say you have 25-star reviews, and for some reason you have that 1-star review. For starters, it's considered user-generated content, and what that means is, if you have a client that has some concern, you can reach out to that client, try to resolve or remedy the issue, and there is always that opportunity for them to update their review to say, hey, all right, I had a bad day. I really don't feel this way. And they could do that. So that's one thing
Mm,
to kind of keep in mind. The other thing is, again, you need to have an area where you're collecting all of your reviews that you can always point a prospect or the regulators to where they can see publicly all of those reviews. But you do have an opportunity, let's say on your website as an advisor, to just display a selection of your reviews, maybe 3 or 4 reviews, maybe using a carousel feature. And what the SEC says is if you aren't displaying all of your reviews in one place, then you do need to add a couple of additional disclosures. So let's say you put 3 selected reviews on your website. You need to indicate if each of those reviews is a current client or not, if they were compensated or not, any conflicts or not. So those 3 clear and prominent disclosures we mentioned previously. But now you also need to add a couple of additional disclosures. One, that those 3 reviews are not representative. And that simply can be 3 words: views not representative. And then you also do need to provide a link to a place where an individual can go and read all of your reviews or a representative list of your reviews. And so that's where we see many advisors that take this approach that are on Wealthtender that will have like 3 reviews on their website and then include those disclosures along with that link to their Wealthtender profile. So now somebody can read all of the reviews for a more representative sample of the
mm.
reviews.
Okay, that's a great answer. Anything else that advisors need to know about the procedures before we kind of move on to the next part here?
I think those are the highlights. There are a couple of other things just to keep in mind when a review comes in. There are certain elements that are not allowed within a review, prohibited content that the SEC deems would be problematic. So, if let's say somebody writes a review and says, Hillary's an amazing advisor for the last year, every month she's doubled my money, right? That's
Mm,
promissory. It's probably factually incorrect. No offense to your investment strategy. But that type of language, anything that's deemed promissory or problematic from a traditional advertising perspective, isn't permitted. Now, again, we really don't see many people talking about investment performance, but you do have an opportunity to maybe follow up with that client and say, "Thank you so much for the kind words. You wrote this, 4 sentence review. The third sentence, because of the highly regulated nature and because it talks about this, we would not be able to include that. Would you be okay if we publish this review, the other 3 sentences?" And of course, they're probably going to be
mhm.
fine with that. So there are opportunities to essentially ensure that rather than just not utilizing the review whatsoever, if the review is in good shape otherwise, to keep that in mind. But that would probably be the one other thing I would say before we move on.
Okay, great. Are there any mistakes that you've seen advisors make since they've been allowed to ask for and use client reviews that new advisors might want to avoid?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And, we're waiting for the SEC to come forward with enforcement actions where we're going to see very clearly what some advisory firms have done that the SEC is pointing out and saying, hey, you can't do this. So we just touched on some of the problems that you see out there. So, one would be having testimonials that speak to investment performance. The other thing I didn't mention because it probably won't come up with most of your clients, but something that the SEC is looking for, there's what they refer to as a de minimis rule. So if you do compensate somebody to write a review about you and you're not compensating them more than $1,000 per rolling 12 months to do so, then it falls under a de minimis rule where there's no written agreement required or additional disclosures. But if you bring in Tiger Woods, or you're paying somebody more than $1,000, then that needs to be disclosed, and explicitly the exact amount you're paying them needs to
Mm,
be disclosed as well. So that's one of the things that the SEC has said they're looking out for. Again, I think that's going to really be more of an issue for larger firms. But the other thing that we've definitely seen as well are, a number of firms that said, you know what, we're going to just go and get Google reviews, right? And there is still an open question as to whether or not the simple act of soliciting a review to uh, encourage a client to write a review on Google is in itself triggering the disclosure requirements, or if that's okay, as long as you don't acknowledge the existence of your Google business profile. So it'll be
mhm.
interesting to see if the SEC comes out with some additional guidance there. But even if they were to come out with guidance that says it's okay to let people write a review on Google, we know that the SEC would say it's not okay to tell people to go look at your Google reviews, because then you're adopting or entangling yourself with that content, and Google's not designed to incorporate the disclosures that are required out there. So that's something to be aware of. And what we've seen now in practice are a handful of advisory firms that did begin collecting Google reviews, just kind of taking that chance, but now their Google business profile has become toxic because a number of the reviews that they received actually did talk about investment performance. And so now you have reviews that include prohibited content that already don't have the disclosures. You can't reply to them because then you're adopting and entangling. You already can't tell people go look at my Google business profile or reviews. So it's just opening up this big can of worms, and now has people reaching out and saying, all right, hey, Wealthtender, like we realize we may have screwed up here, but what can we do? And so, just for what it's worth, we do have a tool to help advisors, primarily those that have unsolicited reviews on Google, import those to Wealthtender. They go through the same approval process where you add the appropriate disclosures, and that, I think, will help some of these types of firms mitigate the risk that's out there. But it's just going to be interesting to see how the SEC looks on those Google business profiles that are essentially online for posterity, that have this very problematic language, because you do have an ability to go and ask Google to take those down. But
Right,
Google, good luck, right? Unless
right.
it's profane or truly something that they see as an issue, like spam from that perspective, it's unfortunately been really difficult for a number of advisory firms to get those types of reviews removed.
That is interesting, and I'm glad you brought that up. It does sound like overall, even though there are hoops to jump through, that you may just want to have a little bit more control over how you get reviews and how you ask people to give reviews, and then you can do what you want to do with the reviews. So that's a really great tip.
Yeah. And then the other thing to keep in mind too, if you think about a Google business profile, formerly known as Google My Business, the name affiliated with that is the name of the firm. And what we really see in action, if somebody gets the name of an advisor at a cocktail party, or they're evaluating an advisor along with two other advisors, they're generally Googling the name of that advisor, not the name of the firm. So with Wealthtender, whether it's an advisory firm that joins with multiple advisors or an individual solo advisor, those reviews are going to be displayed on your individual advisor profile. So if somebody's Googling your name, the reviews that you receive on Wealthtender do start to show up, not the full reviews, but the gold stars that you've earned. So it sends positive trust signals to Google's algorithm. You're going to see those gold stars showing up with your profile and search results. But importantly, you're going to see them showing up next to your name when somebody does a Google search for you, because otherwise the only way they're going to see their Google business profile is if they're Googling the name of your business. So that's been in itself kind of a nuance that I think is
Hmm.
important for advisors to keep in mind.
Well, okay, so pivoting from mistakes and possibly some pitfalls, what have you heard from advisors who have been using reviews and testimonials in their business? Are they happy with results that they're seeing? Are they seeing any difference in who they're attracting as clients, or what success stories have you heard?
Yeah, and in fact, we recently did a case study Q&A that we could share with your audience as well,
Hmm.
with a $200 million firm in New York, United Financial Planning Group. And a great story where one of their advisors joined Wealthtender, started getting some really terrific five-star reviews, and then the founder of the company said, "Okay, clearly we need to do this as well." And he began collecting reviews, and within a few weeks, had collected, I think, 40 reviews. This is a founder of a company that's been in the business for a very long time, has lots of terrific relationships. Now those reviews came in through Wealthtender, getting displayed on their firm profile on Wealthtender, getting displayed on the individual advisor profiles. And then to the credit of their head of business development, they really started doing a great job of incorporating those testimonials into their marketing activity. And within this Q&A, it really talks about their top of funnel, middle of funnel, all the way down, how they've incorporated testimonials throughout the funnel. And in the
Mm.
process, even within a couple of months of getting started from a firm level on Wealthtender, they talked about a firm that chose them over two other firms simply because of the online reviews that really helped solidify the trust and the fact that they've done such a great job for other clients. And then going back to the gold stars that are on Wealthtender that show up in Google search results, they mentioned another firm that saw those reviews, jumped to Wealthtender, read them, and that's the comments they shared when they chose to work with the firm is, we were doing a Google search, we saw your reviews show up, and we reached out to you and saw that you were the best fit for us to work with going forward. So definitely encourage firms to be proactive. It's great out at the outset just getting those reviews online. We have tools to help put them on an advisor's website as well. Obviously, if you can get somebody to your website and they can read your testimonials, that's terrific. But how do you actually get people to your website? And if you can get those reviews in places like Wealthtender, if you can utilize them in social media, which we provide, templates and resources to do so. And in fact, on that front, just to come back to how we talked about how advisors can selectively promote just a couple or three reviews on their homepage, you also have that opportunity if you're just selectively creating a social post. Some advisors we work with have started doing 5-Star Friday, creating like a LinkedIn post where there's a social media template we provide where you can read that testimonial from the person that wrote it and then have those disclosures we mentioned earlier, which again, fortunately, because they can be so short, can simply indicate this client was not compensated and there are no conflicts, views not representative. And here's a link to where you can read those representative reviews. And so within
Mm.
just a couple of lines, it's very easy to have a traditional social media post without a bunch of disclosure, but to satisfy your compliance requirements and then be able to utilize the testimonials that you've collected, not just working for you passively, but being proactive in how you're incorporating them into social media. You can also use that same approach to incorporate them into your nurturing activities with prospects. So whether it's a prospect newsletter and maybe including one testimonial, the appropriate disclosures where they can read more testimonials, and just continuing to drip. If they're booking an appointment, they get a confirmation that includes a testimonial. So the entire time, they're learning about your education, they're learning about your experience, they're learning about how great people say you are, and just really reinforcing how you're going to be differentiated from other advisors they might be thinking about hiring.
Okay, I'm so glad that you brought this up because I don't think I would have thought to ask this question. And this is going to change the way I work with my clients, Brian. That is such a great
Excellent.
thing to know. Yeah, I love that. There are compliance regulations to follow when you use testimonials in your social media posts or your emails or wherever it might be. But it sounds like those are relatively easy to understand and to follow. So really great tip there. Now, before we wrap up, I would love to give you a chance to just kind of plug Wealthtender and tell us more about Wealthtender and all the great benefits that you provide the advisors on Wealthtender.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Hillary. So, first and foremost, Wealth I think is a great platform to help support advisors in this area. Regardless, though, if you have clients that are interested in getting started with testimonials, and even if they're unsure about Wealth always happy to jump on a call. We do have, as you mentioned, lots of resources, playbooks, videos, templates. So even if an advisor simply wants to utilize testimonials on their website, happy to help provide education in terms of how they can do that. If they're interested in Wealthtender, we're really focused on helping advisors strengthen their digital marketing presence. The online reviews is certainly a big component of that, but just one of the many benefits that we do offer. So when advisors join Wealthtender, we create that SEO optimized profile page. Generally within a few days of joining Wealthtender, that's going to start showing up on the first page of Google for relevant search terms. So helping an advisor strengthen their SEO. And then if they do activate that reviews feature, we've obviously talked about all of the great benefits there and the ways that those can be incorporated as well. But overall, we have about 500,000 consumers that visit the website each year. And we provide opportunities for advisors to get featured in different category guides based on their areas of specialization. So if you're an advisor working with or focused on attracting physicians, attorneys, educators, military, or maybe financial planning specialties around education funding, special needs, we've got all sorts of resources where advisors can be featured, and then interactive maps and tools for consumers if they want to start their search by saying, I only want to find an advisor that specializes in working with small business owners. They go to that resource that's generally they're often finding that resource doing a Google search that's showing up on the first page of Google. They come into the resource, they see the interactive map with the advisors in our community that specialize in working with business owners. So lots of great ways to not only help consumers find the best advisors based upon what's important to them, but to help get the advisors on our platform featured in the resources that are most important to the demographics they're looking to work with as well. And then beyond that, we have writers, reporters that are reaching out each week looking for quotes from advisors in our community. So great opportunity for advisors to build authority, getting quoted in the media, major national publications. And a lot of the writers that we work with are really good about including a link back to the advisor's website. So potential SEO benefits there as well. So there's a few other bells and whistles out there, but again, we think it's a really great platform, useful for a lot of advisors that we're seeing, whether they're solo advisors or advisory firms that have multiple advisors that they're really looking to help build their digital footprint.
Yeah, there are so many great benefits to Wealthtender, and I just want to reiterate, as a writer, I've used the Ask an Advisor feature on Wealthtender when I write articles for MarketWatch, and I always get wonderful responses from the advisors on Wealthtender. So, such a great tool for everyone who interacts on Wealthtender. So, thank you so much, Brian. Where can people find you? We'll of course link to the Wealthtender website, but if they want to connect with you, where's the best place that they can find you?
Sure, I'm pretty findable most places. So whether it's the Wealthtender website, email brian@wealthtender.com, or LinkedIn is an easy place to find me as well. And you'll easily find the opportunity to schedule a time with me to chat if you're so inclined.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate your time.
The pleasure is all mine, Hillary. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Finance Marketing Podcast. If you're eager to market your business in a way that feels good and actually gets results, sign up for the Finance Marketing Podcast newsletter in the show notes so you never miss another episode. If you liked what you heard today, please be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite listening app and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll see you back here next Friday.